Добрий день, медіа-центр.
Good afternoon. Ukraine Media Center continues its work, and now in our studio we have Andrii Demchenko with us, the spokesman of the State Border Service of Ukraine. Welcome, Mr. Demchenko. Hi. And we'll discuss with Andrii Demchenko the situation on our borders and current traffic. Could you please tell us what the situation at the moment? Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. About tasks implemented by servicemen of the State Border Service in various areas, I'd like to mention that in resisting Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, border units are acting under general command of the General Staff, and in those combat areas, border servicemen jointly with Ukrainian armed forces and other defenders of Ukraine. The enemy is trying to move deeper into Ukraine, continuing their offensive action. They don't stop their bombing around our units' locations, and there's also stronger fire and assault actions in Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast in order to take full control over those oblasts. However, those attacks of Russian invaders are repelled, their equipment is destroyed. UAV operators target artillery fire at the enemy's locations of their armor storage and equipment. On the borders with Belarus and Moldova, the Transnistrian part, there are no changes in the general situation. At the same time, we see that Russia carries out provocations the Ukrainian part of the border, trying to accuse Ukraine. Also, in some areas bordering Chernihiv and Sumy oblasts, the enemy has been fortifying its positions and surveillance outposts. Also, we have seen certain movements of military equipment around the Russian border. Within the framework of taking control of the state border in Kyiv, Chernihiv and Sumy oblasts, from which defenders of Ukraine have expelled the occupiers, the border servicemen have entered all parts of the border. First, jointly with the Ukrainian armed forces, we reached our locations of our units, and then we reached the whole border line, including the checkpoints. And I have to say that in those oblasts, the total length of the state border is almost 1,200 kilometers. Now we continue reconnaissance in the border area, and engineering fortifications, creation of checkpoints, outposts, and other locations for border personnel to carry out their duties. We have to understand that because of the continuing Russian aggression, there is no classic border protection, because there is still a danger of mines, sabotage groups, and firing from the neighboring country. In particular, our groups have seen shelling by Grad multiple launch rocket systems from Russia into Sumy Oblast. In Chernihiv Oblast, during one day, the enemy shelled 3 times from territory of Russia, and the shells hit the areas around Sinkivka village, and there was an enemy's UAV above that area all the time. Also, in that area of Sinkivka, our border personnel found a group of armed people who tried to enter the territory of Ukraine. We started shooting at those unknown people, and they withdrew. Reconnaissance groups in Chernihiv Oblast continue finding storage places of weapons and ammo left by Russian military and artillery shells. Now about the border with EU countries and Moldova. Since the 24th of February, when the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine started, the state border in both areas has been crossed by about 5 million people. Most of them have been Ukrainians who were leaving our country, amounting to 3.2 million people. We also see that during this time, one 1.1 million of our people have entered Ukraine. I'd like to emphasize that now Ukrainian citizens can still cross the state border using the internal passport. Such decision has been made for humanitarian reasons and agreed upon with border services of neighboring countries, because we all understand that our citizens have it has been problematic for our citizens to quickly get a travel passport to cross the border based on the government regulation number 57. I am to emphasize that it applies to all Ukrainians coming from all oblasts to cross the state border of Ukraine. Also, I'd like to remind you that according to the border crossing rules, minors until the age of 16 can cross the border using their passports of citizens of Ukraine or their birth certificates. At the same time, I'd like to draw attention of Ukrainians to the fact that in some cases when being abroad, there may be an urgent need to have a travel passport according to legislation of respective countries. So please, whenever possible, get the travel passport before leaving Ukraine, before crossing the border. Also, I would like to emphasize that there are still some cases of trespassing attempts outside the checkpoints. Since the 24th of February, we have detained more than 2,100 of such people. Also, there are attempts of Ukrainian citizens leaving through checkpoints, showing forged documents to border control personnel. We have found 450 people involved in that. I would suggest that Ukrainian citizens better don't try to trespass, because there is either administrative or criminal liability for that. Thank you for attention. Thank you, Andrii. Could you please tell us whether there are any waiting lines on the border? Basically, recently, there are practically no waiting lines to leave Ukraine. There are some hours of the day and some directions where there may be a number of people arriving at the same time, and there may be about 100 cars waiting. But the time spent waiting on the border is not that significant. It's up to several hours sometimes. But recently, we also see certain increase of traffic of people to enter Ukraine, in particular Ukrainian citizens. And again, in some areas there may be waiting lines at border crossing points of neighboring countries, usually in Poland. So the State Border Service provides information every 2 hours about the situation at the checkpoints, and there are the same information resources maintained by Polish border guards. So I suggest that citizens should monitor actively this information about the load on the checkpoints and to choose the optimum route where there are no waiting lines. Is our understanding correct that recently people started returning to Ukraine on a broad scale? Well, not exactly so. In the last week, we see certain increase of traffic. It reached the level of 80,000 in both directions, but there would always be more people leaving Ukraine. There was just one day, namely Saturday, when we saw that more people entered than left Ukraine, but that difference was not that significant. At the same time, of course, there has been an increase in the number of Ukrainian citizens who were returning to Ukraine, coming back to Ukraine last week. As I said, in the first weeks after the invasion, those who entered Ukraine were mostly males. Recently, there are also other categories, in particular women, children, and older people. Thank you, Mr. Demchenko. Thank you for joining us. Friends, you're welcome to monitor our announcements. Now we are developing the schedule of our briefings for tomorrow. We will be informing you through our Telegram channel.